March 16th, 2018. The U.S. government's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, commonly known as DARPA, announces a bold initiative to develop what they call next-generation non-surgical neurotechnology. It is designed to allow the human brain to directly interface with machines.
We know that DARPA is exploring human-machine interfaces that include direct connections between the brain and outside systems. That's been from the beginning of DARPA's information technology mission, and it continues to this day. DARPA has created some of the most influential technologies of all time, things that we use and take for granted every day, including the project that became the internet. They've created self-driving cars, stealth technology, GPS that fits in your pocket. That's DARPA's specialty, to imagine the future and create it.
A new technology that is actually very much on the verge of being a reality that is being fielded is we could have a sensor maybe on the surface of our head, or maybe implanted somewhere in our body, in our brain, or something that allows us to interact directly with our communications gear, our processing gear, our weapon systems, and so on. But now imagine we take that technology and we can control robots at a distance with it. Even fly drones. You put this sensor on and you think the right way, and you can increase the speed of the fan by thinking and controlling that thought with direct-to-mind or mind-machine interfacing. With that type of capability, you could control all sorts of buttons and mechanisms in equipment.
Mind-machine interfaces will have many applications in both civilian and military life. But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
There are explicit programs of DARPA to read and write to human brains, whether it's through direct implants within the brain or wearing some kind of cap. So these things are being worked on, and we know that.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
In the near future, DARPA may possess the technology to remotely control the human mind. But as concerning as that may be, according to some scientists, a more permanent kind of mind control technology is looming. And it involves modifying the human brain by altering the human body's DNA.
The future of mind control, and the future being right now because these experiments are being done, is using gene editing tools. And one of them would be CRISPR. The way it works is take the CRISPR, which are these short alternating repeats of DNA. You put that together with an enzyme called Cas. And so you take the CRISPR that you want to use, and you put these pieces together that can be injected and insert this DNA to certain areas of the brain so that we can change brain cells and turn you into something you wouldn't otherwise be. So in this way, gene editing technologies like CRISPR really form a definite basis for future mind control.
These are things that DARPA has investigated. Every technology has the potential for good or evil, and who defines what's good and what's evil, and who uses it for what purpose. These are all questions that have been asked about everything from rockets to self-driving vehicles. We still don't have a good handle on the ethics of various technologies that we use. The technologists tend not to be so concerned with the ethics. That seems to be the domain of other people, policymakers, for example, academics, people like this. There needs to be a hand-in-hand interaction with people creating technology and those who are considering the ethics of that technology.
Medical technology is big business, from advanced prosthetics to robot-assisted heart surgery to high-definition ultrasound and X-ray imaging. But the biggest advances in this field may soon come at the smallest of scales, the nanoscale, measuring just a billionth of a meter in size. Two researchers are at the forefront, designing nanotechnology that may one day be able to sense, diagnose, and even treat cancer.
Nanosensors can work like our eyes, our nose, our tongues, our ears, and the nanosensors can do all these 5 senses.
Donglei Fan runs the Nanomaterial Innovation Lab at the University of Texas at Austin, where she's combining nanotechnology with robotics to develop nanosensors with new capabilities that weren't possible before. Nanosensors are already used in some common devices, like car airbags that can feel a collision and know when to deploy. With funding from the National Science Foundation, Fan and her team are currently developing nanosensors that are 20 to 25 nanometers in size, about 50,000 times smaller than a grain of sand. They're small enough to be implanted inside a patient's body, and yet powerful enough to detect single molecules.
We want to get the materials into nanoscale, which actually have a comparable size with molecules we want to detect.
The nanosensors are designed to hunt and identify specific molecules that are only produced by cancer cells. They're looking for specific types of biomarkers, tiny indicators of an ailment inside the body, like a malignant change to a gene. These nanosensors will be able to diagnose cancer at its earliest stage and be able to make a diagnosis in a fraction of the time it takes today.
With traditional sensors, if the detection needs 10 hours, we only need to have around a few minutes to detect the presence of molecules with the technique we're developing.
To allow the nanosensors to move freely inside a patient's body, Fan's team has also engineered nano-sized robots that propel themselves with a high-speed spin.
With controlled speed apply the electrical voltage, and we achieve ultra-high speed rotation.
While Fan's nanosensors will one day rotate and move through the body to help us detect cancer, other scientists are using nanotechnology to develop treatments that may in the future help treat cancer by analyzing the same biomarkers used to detect it.
According to AI experts, brain implants could make learning obsolete in less than 20 years. Instead of reading textbooks or going to school to gather information, we'll have devices in our brains that download information on demand. That may sound like a lot to achieve by 2040, but based on where current technology is, AI expert Nicholas Karanos says the timeline isn't out of reach. A brain implant, also known as a neural implant, is a device often placed on the surface of the brain. It's capable of communicating with your neurons, recording their activity, and even telling them how to behave. One of the most common applications is deep brain stimulation, where electrodes are implanted into the brain to stimulate different areas and reduce the symptoms of brain-based disorders, such as Parkinson's disease or epilepsy. More than 150,000 people globally have received such an implant, but the implants can control neurons in other parts of the body as well. Doctors have used neural implants to stimulate the spinal cord, allowing individuals with paralysis to walk again. Amputees equipped with the implants were able to control robotic prostheses using nothing but their thoughts. Then there's a host of examples that are straight out of sci-fi novels. For example, a team from the University of Pennsylvania's Computational Memory Lab successfully enhanced people's memory capabilities by stimulating brain regions using electrodes. Perhaps one of the most well-known brain implant companies is Elon Musk's Neuralink. The company's ultimate goal is to merge computers with the human brain so that human intelligence can keep pace with advancements in artificial intelligence. Neuralink uses threads in the brain connected to a 4mm chip called the N1. The company recently released a video that appeared to show a 9-year-old monkey equipped with the N1 chip operating a game of Pong using his mind. The N1 chip is just the first step for Neuralink. The team is also developing neural lace, a brain-computer interface technology. The ultra-thin mesh will be inserted via a tiny needle and encompass the brain. The goal of neural lace is to enable humans to upload and download information directly from a computer, much like Neo in the Matrix. Neuralink isn't the only company making headlines in the field. Led by CEO Ramses Al-Qaid, the Neurable team revealed the world's first brain-controlled VR game in 2017. Their device is a wearable that uses 7 scalp electrodes to record electrical signals in the brain. Mindex is another brain implant company that aims to create a look and think interface for next-generation spatial computing applications. Users will be able to interact with computers using smart glasses that link with the human brain. The glasses will let wearers access information with a single thought. No more rummaging for your phone to Google a burning question. This is all just the beginning. There's a long way to go with this technology before we all have the option to get chipped, and many hurdles to overcome. After all, major elective brain or spinal surgery is incredibly risky. Still, engineers are working on tiny implants, such as the 0.25 square millimeter neurograins, as well as implants that can travel to the brain via the bloodstream, eliminating the need for open brain surgery.
Dr. Giordano, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, it's great to be back. Thank you very much.
So just to kick us off and to kind of level set before we dive in deeper, can you define what you mean by the word neuroweapons?
You know, the idea of using any instrument or method as means of contending against others is a very formal definition of a weapon. It need not be something that is malevolent per se, but again, by operational definition, what a weapon does is in some way alters that individual's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, physical nature, health, in such a way that is going to be more amenable to the individual who is yielding the weapon. So, in other words, I'm changing an individual's stance towards me in some way and making them engage in a stance that's more aligned with what I want them to be. That's a formal definition of a weapon that comes right out of the Oxford English Dictionary. Clearly, when we think of weapons, we think of things like bombs, tanks, planes, boats, soldiers. And that's not incorrect. I mean, I think the more colloquial use of a weapon represents some instrument that's going to induce some kind of morbidity or mortality. And when utilized in these bellicose constructs, that's certainly one of the ideas of weaponology. But weaponology, as we discussed last time, can also include things that I do to my own forces, whether it's the human resources or whether the actual forces themselves, to make them more efficient in their mission of national security, intelligence, and defense, not only in terms of what I do to others. In that sense, if we put the neuro prefix to weapon, what we're really looking at is harnessing the neurological system, both peripherally and centrally, and its functions of thought, emotions, and behavior, so as to then yield instruments, methods, techniques, tactics, and tools that can then be leveraged against others, so as for us to then gain some purchase over their thoughts, emotions, and conduct. So a neuroweapon is essentially any weaponized method or tool that acts through the nervous system or at the nervous system, upon the nervous system, to influence and change the attitudes, feelings, thoughts, behaviors of others.
Thanks for that overview. So when we talk about neuroweapons, what types of technologies fall under that umbrella?
I mean, I think what is important to understand is that the basic technologies of the brain sciences can be parsed into two general categories, very generally. Those technologies that are used for assessing the brain, and those technologies that are used for accessing and affecting the brain. And underneath those two general ideas, we can assess what's going on in individuals and groups of individuals' brains so as to be able to gain some notion of what nodes and networks are involved in different processes of cognition, emotion, and various actions, and what their dispositions might be. And we can use those both as information and as possible reconnaissance targets, if you will, to then affect those substrates, those processes and mechanisms, either indirectly through the use of narratives, memes, symbols, iconographies, psychological operations, human terrain teaming engagements, or more directly. Now, when we're talking about things that are direct, now we're talking about interventional things. And given the fact that the neurosciences are indeed a biomedical life science that also conjoins the physical sciences, now what we're talking about is those things that tend to fall under the rubric of biological toxins and chemical weapons, broadly construed as drugs, microbes or bugs, toxins, devices, and data. And it's those latter two, devices and data, that are really becoming ever more prominent as a consideration and a concern with regard to international oversight and perhaps regulation of what weaponology should and perhaps could be, and how neuroscience and neurotechnologies are then leverageable and employable as weapons on a variety of different fronts. But are there enabling devices? Are there current technologies that can be then radically leveling that could then allow the use of a variety of these different neuroscientific tools and techniques to then be implemented as either instruments of mass disruption and or perhaps as tools of intermediate to mass destruction? In this case, what we're looking at is the use of drones, for example, unmanned vehicles, aerial vehicles, ground vehicles, aquatic vehicles, to deliver payloads of various forms of neurological chemicals, neurological microbes, whether those be bacteria and or viruses, neurological toxins, to a variety of different populations that range from the individual to a fairly large aggregate of individuals utilizing multiple drones and or other forms of unmanned vehicles. The other thing that we're concerned about is certainly the use of gene editing techniques, CRISPR, Cas9, Cas12, not just taken alone, but in concert with extant gene editing techniques. The relative ease of acquisition of these techniques and the relative ease of use. Again, this is not for the completely naive, but someone with basic gene editing and or microbiological skills and molecular biological skills could, in fact, utilize these techniques to modify an existing microbe, an existing virus, perhaps even existing structures of various organisms to create something that is modified or perhaps anew. And the problem we have with that is that those particular new entities might not currently be covered, categorized by the Biological Toxins and Weapons Convention. So here we have the opportunity to sidestep the scope and tenor of those conventions by creating something new or modifying that heretofore has not been listed as a weaponizable agent. Furthermore, if we take a look at some other enabling technologies, for example, nanotechnology, nanotechnology can be used to provide scaffolds or micelles that then allow the autoassembly of molecules in situ, allow their penetrance into a biological system. They can work as chaperones. As well, we can utilize these nanomaterials independently because of some of the characteristics that the nanomaterials possess and some characteristics that can be imbued upon them. Autoaggregation, clumping, disruption, and these can have physiologically disruptive effects when then introduced into a biological system. And one of the more recent developments has demonstrated that these types of nanomaterials are aerosolizable. We can spray them into the air. Now, again, the aerosolizable field at present is rather limited in terms of its size and with regard to its durability and its distance. But these are simply steps toward what may then be probabilities and/or possibilities of how nanomaterials might be used either alone and/or in tandem with other things to either be force multipliers and potentiators or to be used as weaponizable entities themselves. And last, but certainly not least, is the idea of weaponized data, weaponized information. And my colleague Diane DeUlis from National Defense University and working with our senior scholar Joe DeFranco, now of George Mason University, working with some of our colleagues down at SOCOM and now at AFWorks up here in the DC area, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Snow, we've looked at how data might in fact be influential with regard to a force multiplication, not only to engage what the brain sciences are capable of doing, but also to engage the brain sciences in weaponizable ways. I would posit, as a brain scientist myself, that much of the contemporary trajectory of what the brain sciences are recently doing and are intended to do, are aiming to be done, the larger scale and very innovative projects, for example, in imaging and brain mapping, in trying to access the brain remotely on a variety of scales and to engage the brain's functions on a variety of scales, all require big data. And big data that is then yoked to some form of decision technology and/or some level of artificial intelligence to be able to sensibilize those data, assimilate those data, synthesize them, and use them in a real-time accessible way. Now, of course, we're concerned about things like custodianship and proprietary nature of data and access to the data and its relative hackability, and all of these represent real concerns. But more than that, I think, is the issue that to really force multiply the brain sciences or any area of bioscience and technology utilizing big data, you require cells of data that then must be yoked. In other words, you have nodes and edges in networks of data that then allow this level of real-time acquisition, assimilation, synthesis, use, dispersal. And it's not so much the actual nodes themselves that we worry about with regard to their hackability, but instead the networks, the edges of those nodes that allow their interaction on a variety of scales and levels and magnitudes. And those are the things that the stackability of those nodes within networks really gives rise to their relative hackability. And what we're worried about in this concern are a number of things. Number one, that the more data I have about an individual or groups of individuals, the more information clearly I'm able to amass about them, and the more I can use that information in a variety of ways. Many ways that are benevolent, certainly, but also in ways that may be malevolent. In other words, the more I know about you, the more I know where your relative strengths, capabilities, weaknesses, and flaws lie, and the more I can target those things in ways that are specific to you. And that can be across a range of dimensions. It could be your biology. It could be things that have to do with your psychology. It could have to be things with your social engagements, or even something that has to do with your economics. So what I'm able to do is vulnerabilize you by virtue of the amount of information I'm able to put together about you and then yoke that to other information. I can track you in real time based upon your various movements and the various kinetics that come out of your social media, cell phone, and how you're using, for example, credit cards in a variety of different loci in your geographies. I can link you to others in your social chain, and each one of those then becomes a viable nexus through which I can then vector some influential effect, disruptively or destructively. If we take that down to the biological level, the more I know about you biologically in terms of your genome and your genetics and particular aspects of your phenotype, the more I may be able to develop precision pathologies that can affect you specifically in ways that are unique and peculiar to you. And I can do that in a very up close and personal way to disrupt a variety of your physiological processes and therefore create relative devastation, disruption, and destruction perhaps of the things that you are and the things that you do. But I can go beyond that as well. I can corrupt individuals' data by inserting information, very, very, very low level, minute information that changes the entire tenor of the information about them. In other words, the information that exists about you defines, if you will, your online presence. It defines your cyber presence, your cyber identity. It is your cyber fingerprint, footprint, retinal print. And by altering those data in some way, by inserting things or omitting things from your medical record, particularly things that are a bit obtuse or a bit amorphous, what I may be able to do is to insert or remove certain things that are crucial to the way you are regarded and the way you are treated. I can, for example, put into your medical record that you have a familial history of psychiatric disease, or that you particularly have some underlying biological condition that may require treatment or that may negate your treatment. And as a consequence, the way you are not only regarded medically, publicly, politically, legally, and economically, but the way you are engaged and the nature of your engagements can be affected on a variety of scales, literally from the cellular all the way to the social. So when we're talking about the viable weaponology of things neuro, or any really area of bioscience and tech, what we're worried about is those scalar effects that are both disruptive and ultimately, by virtue of ripple, destructive.